Hey, what's up, guys? JB here, and today I wanted to look a little bit at the second anniversary vision card update. Now, before we start, just some baselining. I'm making assumptions here that Global will get the streamlined, sort of revised version of this secondary VC system that JP received not too long after the system was first introduced. Now, I'm doing that because I think it's the best way to go. It will make this information that I have here today hold its relevance into the future. But I just wanted to make sure people were aware that the numbers or values that I highlight in this video could potentially be slightly off if Gumi decides to do what I consider the lazier thing and sort of copy and paste the system to Global as it was first introduced to JP. Second thing I want to say is that I'm not planning on going soup to nuts in explaining all the nitty gritty in terms of the individual categories and how the stats will translate across the various slots. Other content creators have done great work there, so I encourage you to check that out and familiarize yourself with the system, and I'll post some links in the description so that you guys can check that out if you're interested. The third and last note is that I'm focusing this information mainly from a rainbow vision card perspective. Rainbow meaning cards which have bonuses that apply to parties of any element, and these are vision cards that were mostly introduced in the first year of the game, some of which may have lost some favor as we went into year 2 of the game and moved more to mono-elemental parties. But I think the value of these cards is really going to come back in a big way with the introduction of this second anniversary vision card update. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, we're now going to have 6 vision cards equipped in our PvP parties and up to 10 vision cards in our PvE parties. 2, elemental focus cards don't cover all of the relevant areas yet for all the elements. And 3, even if they do cover some of those areas, you may not have the cards. Maybe they're limited, or maybe you just haven't worked on them or pulled them yet. So these are all very good reasons to kind of take a fresh look at some of those older cards and review sort of what they bring to the table. Okay, so I'm done with the preamble now, so let's just get into it. So first thing I want to start off with here is a review on our rainbow effective damage mitigation cards. Our cards which give resistance to missile or slash, magic, or pierce damage. Now, anybody that played in the first 6 to 12 months of the game knows these cards very well. Even in the elemental era, many of these cards are still often used and very good even today. Now, in year 2 of the game, many elements sort of replaced the usage of some of these cards with their own mono-elemental version. But now with the introduction of the secondary VC system, these cards can gain back a lot of their relevance. Now, damage mitigation effects will retain 50% of their power when equipped as a secondary. Now, maybe you pulled the new Twilights of Shadow card from the Final Fantasy XIV collaboration to give your light party more magic resist, and you're really looking to bulk up against that damage type. Maybe you have a wind party and you're using a card like Downtime for some slash resist on your team. You can utilize Solidus again as a secondary vision card, add another 10% slash resist on top of it. Maybe you only have access to one of these MR cards though. Also not lost there. These vision cards, their 15 resist values would get reduced to 7.5%, and it does get rounded up to 8%. So they actually get a little bit more than 50% value there, which is nice. And you can see that the drop off between the UR and MR equivalent is not huge by any means. At that point, you're looking at 10% for a UR card versus 8% for an MR card in that particular resist type. Now, of course, there's other factors at play here and other things you might consider. The base stats of these cards may not be attractive. Maybe some of the other effects on the cards may not be attractive. But I just wanted to highlight that I think that, with this update, some of these MR cards can potentially be viable, depending on your team build, and are definitely things to look at and consider, maybe for certain elements which don't have access to maybe a primary resist type within their cards. So why don't we take a look at another example? So what about 2 slash resist cards? And I think when you look at these two here side by side, the value proposition when you're looking at the secondary column is pretty comparable. Now, obviously, when the elemental party effect is also considered, it does change the conversation a little bit. Iron Giant is a more offensive-oriented card with its slash attack effect, and it's good to wear on a physical attacker, whereas Solidus is more of a defensive choice with the HP party effect and being good for a magical-based unit to wear. But I'm still loving how this system can potentially open up some doors to some MR cards being viable choices and maybe even getting some play, especially when you consider that some elements don't yet have a lot of mono-element VCs at their disposal yet. Think of elements like fire or or lightning, for example. So shifting gears a little bit, and let's take a look at some offense-oriented rainbow cards. Now, there are definitely some that I don't have listed on this slide. These are just some examples that I wanted to highlight. We absolutely see these cards getting a lot of play as secondary choices within the framework of the new system. Maybe you recently pulled Setia and her Brachiosaur vision card, and you really wanted to amp up her missile damage. Throw in the Frederica's Dream card there as a secondary vision card, and you're adding on another 18 missile damage on top. I think when considering the offensive side here, the value gap between MRs and URs is a little bit wider than what we saw on the defense cards. So I haven't listed here the MR equivalents of these various cards, but just as a personal favorite, I do really like the Merilith vision card. In some situations where I'm really trying to stack up crit damage, this is the only rainbow effective crit damage up card that exists in the game today. It's something that I've used quite often in high-end PvE in the past, but let me stop there before I give away, too many of my strats. Okay, so next category of rainbow cards I want to focus on, split party effect vision cards. And these were cards we started seeing mostly, I would say, in the back half of the first year of the game. The nice thing here with these cards is that you're getting two different party effects at roughly 60 to 70% of the value of their single effect counterparts. As you can see with Typhon and Igaion here, for example, you're essentially squishing together a 25 accuracy and 35 typed damage effect into one card at a reduced value. So looking at these again now through the lens of a secondary vision card, it increases their value, in my opinion. The gap between other UR equivalents after the stats are squished is still in that 60 to 70% equivalency range, but the actual gap in the hard numbers is lessened considerably. So the accuracy, for example, with these cards, rather than being 10 less than the full strength 25 accuracy vision card, is actually now only 5 less when comparing secondary equipped value. So sort of similar to what we were looking at with the defensive MR VCs earlier, I think that this shows that the value proposition that these cards have as split effect VCs has definitely increased when considering them as secondaries. I think that represents a great way to get, multiple relevant buffs onto your party in one slot. So, why don't we take a closer look at another example with these? And specifically, let's compare two offensive-oriented VCs. We have here Ifrit on the top, and we have Clairvoyant Astrologer there on the bottom. Both sort of known for their attack percentage up effects to the party. But you can see here when equipped as a secondary, Ifrit's attack is cut at the 50% rate down to 25, while Astrologer is cut down to 18%. So again, rather than the straight 15% differential that we saw as a primary, the 50% versus 35% attack, there's now only a 7% differential, 25% versus 18%. So that gap is closed a little bit. The interesting thing here, though, specifically with the Astrologer card, is that it has a secondary effect of acquired AP, and that is actually one of a small handful of stats, things like AP, HP, and Dex, and some others that suffer less of a penalty when they're equipped in your secondary slot. So acquired AP retains 80% effectiveness when used as a secondary, so that effect gets reduced from its 35% value down to only 28%. So the net effect here from a rainbow perspective, not considering any of the ancillary effects, is that Clairvoyant Astrologer card is just, straight up better than Ifrit in almost all situations now. Next, let's talk about evade and accuracy. And this is an area where rainbow effect cards are going to be doing a lot of heavy lifting. On the evade side, we have the Black Rose for her agility effect, and we have the Shiva card here, of course, for the flat evade that it brings. On the accuracy side, we have the Kalem card for the 35% dex, and we have Igaion and Typhon, who we just looked at for flat accuracy. In the middle, we have the Secrets of the Heart, the Ketone card, as luck is essentially great for both sides of this equation. Now, honestly, the accuracy side is at a little bit of a disadvantage here because, let's face it, a dedicated dex card like Kalem has never been something that a lot of teams really consider. Within the new system, that is one of the stats, as we mentioned, that gets less of a reduction when used as a secondary. So maybe that's going to help its case a little bit, and maybe there's more consideration there for it. But I think when it comes to dex, most parties, if they use it at all, would be looking to a mono card as maybe a secondary effect in it to get that bump in dex, and not look for maybe a dedicated card such as Kalem. We'll kind of have to see how it plays out, though. So that's sort of my first concern when it comes to accuracy moving forward, because when you compare it to a card like the Black Rose card or an agility up card, that's something that's going to be used in every evade party, especially now that we have 6 slots. And many evade parties might opt to have an agility card as both a primary and a secondary. So definitely ups the potential of their total evade even higher. Second, these accuracy cards, as we looked at earlier, they're only going to provide 8 accuracy when equipped in that secondary slot. However, you look at a card like Shiva, and it's retaining 10 evade at 50% effectiveness. So again, that's outpacing the accuracy side here on these particular cards. Third, most evade units are set to gain more raw luck benefit from the Secrets of the Heart card here, because their base luck is just higher than your average team to start with. So these are just a few reasons why I feel like evade's ceiling is higher than the accuracy ceiling in most cases, post second anniversary, at least with the cards that we have access to right now. Now, 2 cards that I didn't mention here are these 2 cards from the Final Fantasy Tactics collaborations. And these cards are great rainbow effect cards as well, if you have them. And that's the key point. These cards were from an era in the game where it was very hard to pull them, very hard to build them as well. And they've never been rerun. So I feel they're pretty rare amongst the player base. And Blades of Grass in particular is the only full effect 25 accuracy rainbow card that we have access to in the game. So yet another kind of small pain point for the accuracy side. Another subset of vision cards that I want to highlight that are also gaining some nice value in my opinion are vision cards that have abilities tied to them. And those abilities can actually be used even if the vision card is in your secondary slot. Now, not all of these cards have applicable rainbow party effects, although many of them do. But the ability granted to your unit may actually be so good that it's worth equipping the card anyway. Think of one of the more recent cards that came out over Christmas in a gift like no other with that 3-hit pierce chaining attack, or the Carbuncle card here. Very nice light card, but that Ruby rejuvenation skill that it has on it is very, very nice. It's a great skill that a lot of units might like to have access to, especially for something like live PvP. So this can definitely add a whole other layer of strategy and complexity to the team build. Something to keep in mind when and if, more vision cards with abilities are introduced in the future. Now, sort of stepping outside of the rainbow mentality for just a moment, I did want to highlight just a couple of vision cards per element here that I think can be very nice from a secondary perspective. And I'm not going to run through them all one by one, but these cards are mostly here just for taking advantage of that lower cut in effectiveness that they would enjoy if they're equipped in a secondary. Things like acquired AP or hit points or dexterity, all effects which retain 80% of their value as secondaries. And that can actually make these cards a little more attractive in some situations because of the stacking of stats that you could pull off across the primary and secondary slots. As an example, I have a screenshot here of Frederica with over 1,000 dex. Absolutely crazy. This is also taking advantage of some affinity bonuses, but still very crazy nonetheless. So it all sort of depends on what kind of party you're trying to build. This is definitely something there to leverage and positions these cards and the kind of effects they have with increased value post second anniversary update, in my opinion. As another sort of special mention here, I do want to bring up the Vow of Love card, and that's because this still will have its initial hate effect given, even if it's equipped as a secondary, and that makes it excellent for auto PvP, of course. Especially I think of a tank like Charlotte, for example, who doesn't have initial hate innately, and she can also actually make very nice use of not only the party effects, but the elemental effects as well. So these are just some examples to sort of get the brain juices flowing. There's definitely other nice ones out there too, especially when you're considering MR vision cards as well. So I would definitely encourage everyone to think a little bit differently with your team building, once we have access to the system. Now, in the bottom right corner here, these are rainbow effect equivalents for these particular stats, AP, HP, and Dex, and that makes them useful on potentially any party. So let's take a closer look at a couple of these. So first here we have the Fleeting Blossom card on the top, which has a party effect of 50% acquired AP. On the bottom we have the Golem Vision card, which has 25% party HP. Now again, these are 2 effects which suffer less of a penalty when they're used as a secondary. So as you can see, Blossoms is only losing 10% effectiveness when it's moving to the secondary slot, going from 50% acquired AP to 40%. You can imagine maybe combining this with an acquired AP primary slot card. And this has the potential to free many units from having to use something like Z's bells. Very nice when you think about it. There's a lot of other great TMRs out there with a lot of nice effects. On the other hand, we have Golem here, losing only 5% of its party HP provided, going from 25% down to 20%. Now, harnessing this card as a secondary, combined with maybe an elemental-based HP up effect in your primary slots, maybe throw in some bestowed HP up as well. It's honestly crazy to think about some of the HP totals that are achievable post-update. And honestly, I'm pretty scared about tanks with 14 to 15,000 hit points or bruisers within the 9 to 12,000 HP range. It's going to be pretty crazy the kind of drain forces a unit like Katone is going to be able to pull off with all this HP at her disposal. Definitely going to be nutty. Now here's sort of like a special fun section here at the end, and this is sort of my take on the singular VC that I think gains the most value with this change to the game. And that's a card that we actually looked at earlier, and it's the Clairvoyant Astrologer card. And honestly, I can see nice uses for this card as a secondary in so many parties. Not only does it have that increased value with the split effect that it has with both attack and acquired AP, but it's also that acquired AP retains more of its effectiveness when used in that secondary slot. Oh, by the way, it also has a great ability on the card as well that it gives to the unit wearing it, so long as they're a spear-wielding class. So just a great card all around the board here, and I really, really like it. Okay, so final thoughts here. I absolutely love this change to the game. As your account progresses, you accumulate more units, you get more cards. It can sometimes feel like you're not really harnessing a lot of what you've collected over time in these smaller PvP parties. And that's absolutely true because we don't. But with this update, we now have 3 or even 5 more vision cards to play with in our parties. So obviously that's just enhancing the value of vision cards immensely. Not only of the ones that we consider pulling in the future, but also of the ones that we already have pulled and have worked on and built. And that's really what I was trying to focus on here today. As we looked at in some various examples, the stat squish that's happening on that secondary slot effectively is bridging the gap a little bit between some MR and UR cards, making it so that MR cards may actually be viable as secondary fill-ins in some cases. It also makes some vision cards that have split effects on them more appealing as secondary slot mainstays. Now again, as I said at the start of the video, I really wanted to limit the scope here today on what we call those rainbow effect vision cards, but I think with some of the principles and ideas that we looked at here, you should be able to navigate and come up with even some better combinations, leveraging some of the mono element party effects that these cards also have during your team building. The examples I provided here today are by no means meant to be a best in slot guide. Not everybody has best in slot, and that's okay. But I think the takeaway here is that these options can represent good ways to keep competitive within a means that you may already have access to. So I encourage everybody out there to review what cards you have at your disposal and how you might be able to take better advantage of them within the framework of this system. So what are you guys thinking out there? Are there other vision cards out there that I didn't highlight that you really like within the context of this new update? Definitely let me know about that in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, help us grow and be notified of my future videos. And that's really all I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.